Good afternoon or good evening, wherever you may be listening to us from, here on this big, beautiful planet we call Earth. This is Michael Cross here with another edition of Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY TV Productions, where we try to dig a little bit deeper than, well, actually, let's change that. We try to dig a lot deeper than what you're going to get in the mainstream media. So anyway, before I begin, I encourage people to subscribe to my YouTube channel if you're listening to this on YouTube later on. And also check out my new science fiction novel, The Destiny of Our Past. I think you find it interesting, the exploration of, was our ancient history exactly ancient? Anyway, you can check that out on Amazon, The Destiny of Our Past. Anyway, speaking of science fiction sorts of topics, I want to deal with an article that I recently ran across, and it's on Vladimir Putin. And no, it's not on some sort of alleged collaboration between Putin and Trump or any other sort of fairy tale from the 2016 elections. Instead, Mr. Putin is saying that there's something that could be more dangerous than nuclear bombs ahead for the human race. And, you know, there's a lot of different things we've talked about on this show in reference to technology. And, you know, technology is merely a tool. Technology started, I know you're sitting there going, hey, come on, what about what Putin said? I'll get to that in just a moment. Anyway, technology is just a tool. When we were in more primitive days, we may have used bow and arrows to bring down large game. Because obviously we don't have the claws or the teeth to be able to get much of anything besides maybe a rabbit or something. And then it could outrun us. And then as we developed our technology that enabled us to do new things that made life more convenient. Then, to a large degree, due to the labor shortages created by the plague that hit England, England as well as the rest of Europe, we had to find ways to save labor and still make products. And that sowed the seeds of the Industrial Revolution. And essentially what the Industrial Revolution was an ability to be able to create more goods with less labor. And we've only been advancing since then. To the point now that we're using robotics to make products. In fact, we could even replace most of the workforce in the very near future with robotics to be able to create the things that we so much demand. But the irony is of the Industrial Revolution is the technologies that we develop, we can also start applying to ourselves. In fact, instead of us as human beings being able to magnify our abilities with using tools outside of our bodies to accomplish things, we could apply this technology to our very inner selves. And this is what Putin is talking about. He is talking about the idea of being able to create essentially super soldiers. All right? The ability to be able to alter the DNA of already existing human beings to be able to give them incredible strength and also maybe not even perceive pain. So in a sense, it's very similar to what the Vikings did with the Berserker. If you've never heard of Berserkers, they were like shock troops sent in at the front of a battle who were usually really high on drugs. And when they would get in there, they would just start swinging that battle axe or sword. And, you know, if you're not feeling the pain when someone, stabs you, but you're still just fighting. You're not concerned with, oh my gosh, my intestine's hanging out. You just keep fighting. Then you're a very dangerous adversary to encounter. Now, this is what Putin's talking about, is the ability to be able to create soldiers that have this kind of capability, but they're going to think straight. They're not going to be hopped up on drugs. All right? In fact, their intelligence could even be increased, and their concentration improved. And so he's saying that this could be very dangerous to have in the hands of some sort of military superpower. In fact, a country might not even be a military superpower. It could be a moderate-sized country, and it would be able to become pretty much a world leader, if not the world leader, with this kinds of technology. Now, he was speaking to students, according to the Yahoo article here. He was speaking to students at the 19th World Festival of Youth and Students in Sochi. That's in Russia, by the way. And he was actually saying that it's dangerous to play around with the forces of God. And the article goes on talking about the classic Jean-Claude Van Damme movie, Universal Soldier. And he's basically saying that when we do something, was a quote here from the article, when we do something, whatever we do, I want to reiterate again, we must never forget about the ethical foundations of our work. Now, the thing is that I've said this before in previous shows. Ethics have a way of kind of going out the window when you apply a Machiavellian approach to, be it, world politics or military policy. Machiavelli said, essentially, even though this is a paraphrase that's very popular, that the ends justify the means. He also said it's better to be feared than to be loved. And essentially with the Machiavellian approach to ethics is, if it gets what you want, you should do it. If it advances your goals, if it serves to maintain your power, but also protect your interest, then it's something you should do. Now, the thing is that you may think this is really kind of insane, the idea that we could change people who've already been developed through, let's say, some sort of drug therapy. Now, I would speculate, actually, that a more reasonable way to do this, something that might be more possible, which is what I play with in my book, The Destiny of Our Past, is the idea that you could develop nanotechnology that could accomplish this. Okay? You don't have to have some sort of breeding farm type thing or something similar to that one scene in one of the Resident Evil movies where the heroine comes across hundreds of herself being cloned because she has these special abilities. She's like a super type soldier because of genetic enhancement. The thing is that you could do it when someone already exists, but that means you have to change the cells of that person. Now, you might be thinking, oh my gosh, this is so science fiction. What, probably Putin was just trying to catch the attention of all these young people, and spark their imagination. And have some soundbite out there that the media and these young people would be talking about. Well, you might think that, except I also ran into an article. This is not out of Yahoo. It's out of the Daily Mail, but I found it in several other sources as well. It's just I can't get the full articles, as you have to have a subscription to them. And it's an article about NASA. And the title in the Mail article is, NASA wants to alter the DNA of Mars astronauts. in the 2030s to protect them from cancerous space radiation. And it talks about the idea that you could use DNA drugs to deal with any kinds of harmful effects coming from the idea that you'd be exposed to a lot of really nasty, gamma rays and other types of things that our atmosphere protects us from here on Earth. And that could really do some major damage. I mean, you might go to Mars, you might even come back, but you might, wind up with a whole bunch of cancers afterwards. And, the idea here within the description in the article is more radical genetic alterations could help boost the body's own resistance. So, in a sense, this is saying that you could actually start a program for people while they're preparing for the Mars mission that would be able to at least give you shielding or protection or advance your own immune functions. So essentially, it's the same kind of premise that Vladimir Putin is warning against, is the idea that you can still alter the human body from the cellular level out. Okay, we've talked about this idea that that in the future, at least according to, pretty much all the experts, we're going to be altering our bodies. We're going to be changing who we are through having technology put within us. And I think I'll get to that in the next show, the Global Trends 2030, next part of this show here, actually. But the thing is that this idea that we can just start changing ourselves, this could, of course, it will have military applications. Almost everything we know about medicine today, almost everything, is ultimately something that has come about because of war. That's right, because of war. This is why we have what we have today. And, just to give you a recap on that, the Civil War did a great deal in regards to helping us learn about the effects of contamination of a wound, bacteria, and so forth on the survival of a human being after they have had body trauma. Now, most men in the Civil War were not killed instantaneously. I've read up on that, as well as battles on the frontier with American Indians. And the account I read of Custer's battle was most of the men were wounded. They were taken out of action, but they were wounded. But the wounds were such that they couldn't fight anymore, and then they were finished off by, if I recall right, I'm trying to think. I know this happened to me, by the female members of the tribes that because it was considered unsportsmanlike, or in a sense, it was just going in and just killing a wounded person was considered beneath a warrior. And the same was true in the Civil War. Now, you didn't bring in people women in the South or the North to kill the wounded soldiers, but the thing was that you could the bullets of that time were not they're not like an AK-47 bullet where if you shoot someone in the hip, it might exit through their neck. Okay, and it didn't have the same velocity and kill power. So most of the time, you'd get shot, and you'd be kind of messed up, but you could walk to the infirmary, to be treated. The problem is that it would get bacteria inside of the womb. And often what you died of was gangrene or a number of other poisonings to your blood. And our doctors were trying to figure out how to save these men. And we really developed a lot of neat ways to treat people, starting in the Civil War. And then, my gosh, World War I, we learned a lot about how to get a soldier back into action instead of him dying or being unable to go back in because maybe he gets shot in the leg and doesn't cause much trauma to the leg, but it gets infected and you have to cut it off. Well, he can't go back into battle anymore, can he? World War II, we learned even more. In fact, sometimes in very nasty ways. I mean, much of what we know about hypothermia, trauma, and what is the plague of all things was derived from the human experimentation centers at Unit 731 in Japan. Not in Japan, they were in Hanun, China. The Japanese had taken over that region, and they used hundreds of thousands of primarily Chinese prisoners, male and female, but also American, Russian, civilian, and war prisoners. And they did really nasty human experiments on them. But the U.S. government gave the scientists immunity after the war, as long as they turned their journals over, so that the American military wound up in possession of the technology that they had learned from there. So war is always a way that we learn things. I mean, NASA was really instituted by the United States. It got its funding because we were in a competition for fear of how military could be influenced by space weapons and so forth. We were in a competition with the Russians to get to the moon. And there's a lot of our technology today that we use that was, this space race was a catalyst for. And so there is no doubt in my mind that the more we discover about how various drugs or even nanotechnology could affect the human being and the capabilities of their organs and muscles and so forth, the likelihood that it would not have military applications is very slight. So I think Putin is absolutely, positively on the right track there, because the country that develops this is going to have such an edge. All right? Think about soldiers that would not surrender. Think about soldiers that could get shot, but maybe their wound would heal fast enough that they could go back into battle fairly quickly. Or if they're wounded, it might just be like the old, it's just a flesh wound sort of thing. And they would continue fighting until, they won the battle, and then they could go back and get fixed. The thing I'm just trying to get at here is not some sort of premise for a new, updated universal soldier or something like that in people's minds. It is the idea that human beings, when they have the capability of doing something, will do it. Even the Bible says that when people are united, back in the Tower of Babel days, it says, if people are united, nothing is impossible for them to do. And I actually believe that before the flood, when people were, united and had all this technology and so forth, that they did stuff that we're just now thinking about. Okay, that's not a plug for my book, The Destiny of Our Past. Well, actually it might be. Who knows? Check it out. Then I'll stop plugging it. Anyway. No, but the thing is that human ethics, if we're talking about right now where we are at, I think that we really do have this belief that people in charge of governments, corporations, and so forth have the same ethics we do. because obviously they go home, they have their kids, they have their cat or dog, they have all this, they're human beings. They go to the supermarket just like we do. Again, they're human beings. They must think like us. No, they don't. No, because if you are given the responsibility for protecting your country at all cost, then you're going to think in terms that are going to be more of a much bigger perspective. You're going to be willing to compromise, just like Machiavelli said in The Prince. You're going to have to sometimes put your personal morality aside for the greater good. And so, do U.S. presidents assassinate people, or they know about it being done? Well, I don't think there's any president. I mean, we may think that our agencies don't do that sort of thing, but I think they've been doing it for quite some time. And while our presidents might not want to do something like that personally, and they don't believe in it morally, they have to put those kinds of things aside when it comes to implementing foreign policy. And so I think that our scientists would, they come up with the stuff, and then that's just a tool. It will be the application that will necessitate the human factor. But I think that we're going to do it. I think that we really will. And again, the future is not going to look like it does today. I think it's ridiculous when people think that the future is something that's going to look just like now. And I think it was John Maynard Keynes who said something about that, that everyone tends to want to think that things don't change. And they really do. And the change, just like you see the change in the way that everything is, in the last 30 years has changed in regards to how people can even reproduce, how people communicate, how people see the world. That's all changed radically. I'd venture to say, if anyone listening to this show right now, if they could climb into a time machine and be sent back to, let's say, something fairly recent, 1985, not so long ago really, during the middle of the Reagan administration and the Cold War and stuff, how would you function? Think about it. If you had no computer, no iPhone, and you had to look up some information, how weird that would feel to go into a library and to be able to find this, piece of information that you had to look up. I mean, we've gotten lazy, even those of us who grew up during those years, and had to go to regular libraries to do research for college or even high school. The idea today would be like so cumbersome. It would be like, when you go camping and let's say you rough it completely. I've done this before. You go camping, but you don't take food. And you figure, what? If I don't find berries and I don't catch fish, I'm not going to have any food to eat. And, you do it. You survive at it. But the problem is that it's a lot harder. It's a lot more difficult. And yet what I'm trying to say here is the world has changed remarkably. Okay? In one generation, this world has totally changed. Give it another generation, it could be just as much. And it's not going to be just the same like, okay, well, now we have the internet. What is next? It's going to be things that are going to be even more advanced and bigger changes. Because the more technology we have, the more challenges we have, the more we will see that applied in different ways. Okay? So, is Vladimir Putin just maybe watching too much sci-fi? Or is he getting information that, he is ex-KGB, although he wasn't like, some sort of assassin or something. He was a guy that was, pretty much one of these guys that was in an office in East Germany. But he does value intelligence. He does value knowing what's coming up. All right? And in this sense, there must be a reason why he threw this out here, instead of it just being to get some young people all excited about the future. No, I think he threw it out there for a purpose. He knows what's being researched both in Russia, but he also knows what's being researched in China, what's being researched in the United States, England. Who knows? Maybe countries like Iran are doing this kind of research, or Israel. The thing is, whoever comes up with it first is going to have some really major advantages, and it's going to be a huge game changer. But it's not the only one that could change things in the future. And also, I'm just wondering about this. Now again, it's hard technology. We don't really, at least from my understanding, we're at our infancy stage when it comes to this. It would be like if you've copied off a whole bunch of papers and you were going to distribute them, and then you found out the date was wrong. You have to change the date. And you've got 100 papers there that you were going to send out. But you also don't have access to your copier machine anymore. And these have to be sent out in paper, not as an email. So what you do is you have to go in and you have to change the date by hand on every one of those. Now that is what this technology would be like. You would have to go in and change not just one type of cell, but you'd have to change another type of cell, and then another one. All right? So it's not easy stuff. It's not like something in a movie where it's just the scientist comes up with something, they inject it, and all of a sudden now this guy, I think they did stuff with X-Files with that too, has all these super strengths. But again, when people put their minds to it, it will happen. And so it's just something to think about here. Just how much we're going to be in control of our own environment and ourselves in the future. Anyway, that's all for this segment. Hope you come back for the next, stay tuned for the next segment of Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY TV Productions. Take care now. Okay, well, welcome back to the second half of our show here on UCYB Productions. This is Michael Cross here with another edition of Unlock the Door Radio, and I would like to continue this concept of what's coming up in the future. The idea that the future is going to be totally different than what we think of it, and even the near future. And again, it's not idle speculation. A lot of times I think people look at and see these things about predictions for the future, and they think, okay, well that's good for selling newspapers and making headlines and that sort of thing. But, there was a recent, well, not really recent, it came out a couple of years ago, but I think relatively recent report. And I would really encourage people to look this up. Okay. Also, look up my new science fiction book. I almost said Unlock the Right. No. Look up my new science fiction book, The Destiny of Our Past. Okay, The Destiny of Our Past. I know it sounds contradictory. The destiny is sort of like means the future, and then of our past, which is like, well, it's the past. What does that mean? Well, you'd have to look it up to really realize what it refers to. You can find that on Amazon. But ultimately, the future is going to be interesting. All right? And there was a report done by a group of intelligence agencies, quite a few actually. And it's their job to figure out what's going to happen in the world in the next few years. If you don't do it, then you're stuck. You could be in a situation where, you don't realize exactly where we're heading. And then when it does happen, then you're kind of like, oops, now what? Okay, and this is one of those things that is very important for people to consider. And there's a quote here within the Global Trends 2030. By the way, just look it up in Google. Global Trends 2030. It's in a PDF form. You can copy it off. You can read it and see for yourself what the people in the know are thinking is going to be the future that's coming up in less than, well, what is it now? It's going to be like a little bit over 12 years. And this will be the present. For all I know, if we still have YouTube available to regular people, someone could be listening to this this broadcast on YouTube. By the way, subscribe to my YouTube station. You won't regret it. Anyway, you'll be listening to this in 2030. Okay? It could happen. And then people will be able to say, oh, well, we came a lot further than that. So anyway, there's a quote here at the very beginning from John Maynard Keynes, 1937. Okay, people are going, not Keynes. Okay, I'm not talking about advancing his economic theories. I'm just saying, he was an intelligent person, and he had some good insights that, and this is one of them. The idea of the future being different from the present is so repugnant to our conventional modes of thought and behavior that we, most of us, offer a great resistance to acting on it in practice. Let me say that again here. I'll slow down here. The idea of the future being different from the present is so repugnant to our conventional modes of thought and behavior that we, most of us, offer a great resistance to acting on it in practice. What Mr. Keynes is saying there is we don't want to think the future is going to be all that different. Oh, if you watched, when you were a kid, if you watched the Jetsons on TV, you may have had a situation in which you saw all this really fantastic technology, but you still had a husband, wife, and kids living. They had a robot, as I recall, made, but it was almost like watching just the Flintstones with fancy gear. I mean, because it was like, again, projecting back in the past. The Flintstones was showing you kind of a 1950s working class way of life, except that they had dinosaurs and rock cars. In the Jetsons, it was a high technology, but it was still the idea of pretty much contemporary family, just with all kinds of neat gadgets. And we could look at lots of science fiction, even Star Trek. It's supposed to be set 300 years in the future, and yet the humans in Star Trek were really essentially humans. They weren't changed. I don't know about the new Star Treks. I kind of fell out of watching all of the spin-offs from Star Trek back in the 1990s. I think I just kind of said, okay, enough's enough, But the original Star Trek, and even the one that came out, the Next Generation, you didn't really have that much modification of human beings, and they still had the same relationships and that sort of thing going on. And reflected the society of the time. The 1960s, the Star Trek was kind of like a war show with science fiction and some philosophy thrown in. They were always in fights. They were always using their weapons and that sort of thing. Whereas the one in the 80s was kind of there were still times you use weapons, but it was more of a exploration of human interaction and relationships and that sort of thing. So it's sort of, I always just nickname it Yuppies in Space. But the thing is that we do hold a resistance to seeing the future as being different than now. And especially when it comes to our bodies. So when you do make comments that in the future people will live this way and they'll do this and this and this, they see it like, what? No way. It's like if you go into a group of people and say that there's a demographic change taking place. If you were to go back through time, I like this time machine premise. If you were to go back through time to Los Angeles in 1980, and the year Ronald Reagan was elected, you go back to Los Angeles and you predict that in the future California will be really liberal, and also that 46%, which this just came out recently, 46% of the residents of California would speak a language other than English when they're at home. And that Los Angeles would be, what is it now? Is it primarily Hispanic now? Make all those predictions. Make all those predictions, and people would look at you and think, you're crazy. Look around you. Okay, the demographics of Los Angeles, it's mostly white with a significant population of black people. And California is considered a fairly safe Republican state. Well, that sure changed in 30 years, didn't it? The thing is that people offer resistance because it makes them uncomfortable to climb out of the, I guess, the ultimate shell of the present and speculate on the future. If I have two families, one of them has set a goal of one kid per family, and they're going to raise their kid to only have one kid, and then when that one marries, they're going to only have one kid. And then I have a family over here that's very traditionally religious. I don't care, Mormon, Muslim, whatever, Orthodox, Jewish, and they have 4 kids. And they're going to urge their kids to have 4 kids. And they're going to urge their kids to have 4 kids. In our minds, we still have this resistance, like, no, it looks pretty even here. We got 2 families here, and it's going to look this way. The demographics are going to look the same in 30 years. Well, that's not going to be the case. Okay? There's going to be a lot fewer of family A and a lot more of family B. That's just the way it's going to be. All right? Things change. All right? Ask the American Indians. You go back 400 years and say, someday you're going to be a little tiny minority, and there's going to be all these people that you couldn't even imagine exist today, and they're going to build giant cities and, from this ocean to this ocean. And they would look at you like, what? What are you talking about? Well, again, so let's just think about this in this case here, as these people have gone and made predictions. Now, I'm just going to go through some of the predictions here. I still would encourage people to read this, although I know that most of you won't, but you really should. It's really interesting stuff, and it also will give you a glimpse into the future. Okay. One of the things it brings up here at the very beginning on page 10 is a whole bunch of what they call megatrends. And I think these are very, very interesting. They also have game changers too. But let's just list some of those megatrends here. One of them is individual empowerment. Individual empowerment will accelerate owing to poverty reduction, growth of the global middle class, greater educational attainment, widespread use of new communications and manufacturing technologies, and healthcare advances. Now, if you go into the articles itself, it even goes into things like augmentation, people going in and changing their body and so forth. I'm not going to deal with that in this show, but it's in there. But let's just deal with what they mean by that, and I'll get into some of the others as well. What they mean by the individual empowerment is the fact that we are seeing less and less poverty around the world. Now, most people, if you say, envision Africa, Well, they envision Africa as being something that they've seen on TV because the vast majority of them have never been to Africa. And so they start thinking about villages they've seen in some travel show or something like that. The first thing they don't think of is modern cities in places like Tanzania and Kenya and so forth. They don't have that kind of mindset because it's been created by, television, which gives us our view of the world. Unless you've actually been there yourself, it's got a long ways to go. But I certainly, when I was in Uganda, I did not see starvation. People seemed to have plenty of food. The markets were full of food. People seemed, in that sense, they seemed to be in pretty good shape. And the thing is, we're seeing less and less places where people are starving because our economies and our infrastructure worldwide have developed in such a way, and our trade has developed in such a way that we're kind of becoming one big community in that sense. So poverty is decreasing. Now, that's not to say living standards in the developed world are improving. They're not. Because what we're seeing in the developed world is a competition with the underdeveloped world, or the developing world, in which they can do things a lot cheaper. And so they're going from maybe having to walk to get to work to the point of most of the, going from walking to bicycle to motorcycle, and many of them advancing even to cars. And the thing is that in the developed world, we're seeing a decrease in manufacturing jobs, which means that we're seeing a decrease in the number of people. Your opportunities when you graduate. You have to, really get a lot of education or skill in order to get a job now that's not just, minimum wage. And so that's a lot different than it used to be, where, like back in the, Fred Flintstone cartoon era, where you just had to be a strong guy that was willing to go to work and put in your 8-hour shift, and you could afford a home and a car and, a certain amount of luxuries as well. All right? And you didn't need any training for it. Often students could drop out of school and get a job making cars or whatever, work in a lumber mill, and be making more money than their teacher was earning. All right, so that's something to keep in mind. But the thing is, there is this rapid acceleration of the middle class in Asia and even in Africa, and of course Latin America. Greater educational attainment, because of course you need more education in order to fit into these new economies, and new communications. You can go anywhere. At least, okay, I've been to China, I've been to Tibet, which is part of China. I've been to it's just more remote. I've been to Africa, and you could see people riding a bicycle, but they have an iPhone. They're talking on their iPhone as they're carrying some goods to market or something. This is creating a situation where people are connected. You can even look at your own Facebook or something. You've got people on there maybe you graduated high school with. I know that when I went on Facebook, I'd been out of high school for a couple decades, and just for fun, I looked people up and added them, sent them friend requests. And normally, you only see people, that you graduate high school with on high school graduations, if you are able to travel and take part in these. But now you can just be on Facebook and you can watch who's having kids, who's got grandkids, who's gotten bald, who's gotten fat, whatever. You can watch it real time. And, that just gives you a personal glimpse into how technology is changing things. More and more people, for instance, are meeting their husbands or wives via the internet. Especially if you're not someone that likes to go to like nightclubs and drink and stuff like that. If you've got a religion, for instance, let's say you're a conservative Jewish woman, and you don't find that kind of thing appealing to try to find someone at a nightclub that might be Jewish and also shares your values. It's much easier to go on a dating site. Okay, so that's changing things. So our biology is even changing. People are meeting each other across national boundaries. So a person could easily keep up a relationship with someone. Let's say they live in Germany and they've gotten to know someone that lives in Slovenia. Well, technology allows them to be able to stay in touch and maybe someday get married. So just like the Industrial Revolution changed things by people from various parts of a region moving in and then reproducing with each other, technology is doing the same thing. So knowledge is just instant now. You don't have to go to a library. You don't have to spend all day researching. It's just, it's at your fingertips. You can look up anything, good, bad, or ugly. The technology you've got right in front of you right now could get you connected to anything. Okay, diffusion of power is listed here. There will not be any hegemonic power. Power will shift to networks and coalitions in a multipolar world. Hey, face it, the United States is less than 5% of the world's population. Okay, most Americans think it's like 40 or 50. No, it's not. It's less than 5. As India surpasses China in size, China has 1.4 billion people. India will have more than that. I mean, you can see where the power shifts are going to take place. England, it has is around 60 million people. That's not even 1% of the world's population. Is it? 60, 600, yeah, it's about 1% of the world's population. So, in order, England has had to join up with countries, even though England's leaving the EU, they've still had to get together when it comes to NATO for defense purposes. So they have to be in with Germany and France and Italy and so forth in order to have a military presence. So ultimately, we're seeing this more and more. In fact, I think we'll wind up with about 6 regions in the world, in the near future, that power will reside in. There won't be any one single country that can exert all of its influence, be it Beijing, be it Washington, D.C., and certainly not Moscow. Demographic patterns. As economics grows, it says here, economic growth might decline in aging countries. 60% of the world's population will live in urbanized areas. Migration will increase. That's an irony. As more and more women get into the workforce, it reduces the birth rate. It increases the potential taxes. It creates a greater consumer base. Prices on homes rise because you can sell them for more. You have more competition for the homes that get built. But on the other flip side of that, as the homes get more expensive, then young couples have a harder time affording a home. If they have a harder time affording a home, there's less likelihood that they will have a large family because they're having to live in apartments during their fertile years. And that could reduce their family size to 1 or 2 kids. As the population then ages because you don't have enough births, you then later will see declines in economic power. Okay, you'll see less and less and less power exerted as the population gets older and older and older. Lots of countries in Europe now that have low birth rates well, all of Europe has low birth rates, but some of the ones with really severe low birth rates, they're proposing keeping people working until they're like 70 years old, some 75. These are the proposals coming out, because you can't maintain your tax base and maintain a welfare state with an aging population. So the populations will grow in the developing world, although their growth rate will be slower than we've seen in recent decades, I should say. Already China has had to bump up, to where you can have 2 kids now in that 40% of the country that they limited it to 1 all those years. And they're going to have some problems with an aging population. Of course, they're going to try going for mechanization to deal with that. So we're seeing an aging population in the developing world in a very negative way. Now, I was listening to this news broadcast from Africa where they were saying, well, we're quite competitive in Africa in the sense that are with human resources, but yet the developed world doesn't want to allow open migration. And that's going to become a huge issue in the future. You already see it as an issue today. How people are reacting to a relatively small number of refugees and migrants coming into Europe now, or even proposed for the United States. And with it, of course, this won't solve problems. This won't be like, okay, well, everyone can go to work now and everything will be fine. There's a whole bunch of other things that have to be dealt with. But this is just going to be exacerbated in the future, at least as seen here, where you're going to see more migration, and cities are going to become much larger. That's the irony. In America, for instance, cities such as Los Angeles, people complain, oh my gosh, we just got too many people, the world, and then a lot of times they'll look out and say, well, the world's overpopulated, look, it takes me 2 hours to get to work, there's traffic jams, there's this and this and this. But yet in much of the United States, you've got relative ghost towns developing, where the average age in many small communities in the Midwest is like 55. Okay, because the young people, for the most part, have moved because there's better economic opportunities in mid-size or metropolitan communities. You make more money, and you have more conveniences. So it's not an issue of too many people. It's actually an issue of where they're distributed. But then again, you can't just suddenly say, like some communist 5-year plan, well, we're going to redistribute 1 million people from Los Angeles to live over here and 1 million over here. You can't do that, because people naturally are drawn to where the money is. And that's true for every single country on earth. Okay, every country, be it Tanzania, be it South Africa, be it Russia, be it India, be it the United States. Okay, big cities are going to get bigger and more concentrated. And water, food, and energy. Demand for these resources will grow substantially owing to an increase in the global population. Tackling problems pertaining to one commodity will be linked to supply and demand for the others. So here we have a situation in which, our agriculture is not just energy dependent and water dependent, but it's also dependent on various minerals and phosphates and stuff like that we get from the soil. I mean, because, you grow food. We don't do it the old-fashioned way anymore, where you'd spread human waste and ashes from this winter, from the fires and stuff, out on the fields, and then that would resupply the health and vitality of the soil. Even in our backyards, if we had to grow a garden, think about all those years where your trees, you raked the leaves and you threw them away. Well, that means those leaves that were taking up minerals and so forth and nutrients, you just threw them away. And now your soil on your yard for growing stuff is almost worthless after a couple decades. unless you put fertilizer on it. That's going to create some issues there. But water is going to become a huge issue now. One of the reasons why I think Iraq does not want to give the Kurds the northern part of the country is because if you take a look, most people don't realize this, but just look up northern Iraq, Kurdish, and mountains. And you see some beautiful mountains with snow. Well, what happens? The snow melts. It supplies rivers. Rivers supply water. Therefore, that's a resource. Take a look what's happening worldwide. Major corporations are buying up water rights. You've heard these stories about someone getting arrested for making a pond on their yard, or the places where it's illegal to collect rainwater. Okay? That's because water is being sold as a commodity. And water could become the new oil in the future. So it's just something to keep in mind there. Now, the thing is, this goes through a whole bunch of different patterns. It's what's going to happen. And, of course, it lists the potentials for increased development or game changers that could occur, such as if there's wars or terrorism or and other variables. But Global Trends 2030 gives you a snapshot into the minds of what the experts are thinking is going to come in the very near future. And it's not very science fiction-y. Yes, it does talk about technology and how that will enhance things, but it just throws it out as a matter of fact. This is going to happen. Now, of course, we can assume that robots will do more work in factories. This will displace workers and so forth. But they don't really deal a lot with how that will affect economies. Okay, it's not a report about robots. It just mentions things. It mentions a lot of potentialities which could make things better, or it could make things worse. But I really encourage people to read up on these things. And the one thing I would say is this. Maybe this is a way to motivate you here. Is we read things in newspapers. We read and that gives us or watch things on TV. Like I said, the thing about Africa, most people's vision of Africa is based on travel shows, which is totally inaccurate. It'd be, like watching a travel show where they're showing things about Oktoberfest in Germany and thinking that German women walk around in traditional clothes and guys walk around with little shorts and green hats and stuff like that. No, that's not the way it looks in reality. But the thing is, sometimes we hear people in the alternative media say, hey, this is what's coming, this is what the elite want, this is what the elites are saying is going to happen, and we immediately go, oh my gosh, there he or she goes again, probably watching a little bit too much sci-fi. But in reality, they're not. These people usually are looking up things, and not all of some of them may be going a little overboard, but most of the ones that I'll hear something about plans for the future and merging with machines is one that one talk show host gives a lot, and people think that's crazy. Merging with machines, sure. But yet that is so, you don't have to even scratch the surface to find this is the goal of many of the people we call the elite. And they talk about it in their papers. They talk about it in reports. They deal with these kinds of things. So while most Americans are watching sports or celebrity shows or pornography or something like this, the experts are looking into things as, they're looking into things that most people have never looked at. Most people have never heard of. And that is why I encourage you to look at something like this. There's others that go into the future, but check out Global Trends 2030. And this is what they're writing. This is what they're reading. Okay? And this isn't everything. There's more. But this gives you a snapshot into something that 99.9% of the people will not look up, will not read.